Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Modern Open in Louisville, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard. I'm Nick Miller alongside now Grand Prix runner-up Collins Mullen. How you doing?
Excellent, excellent. It's been a good couple of weeks for me.
Yeah, you've been tearing it up between Modern, playing Scape Shift, winning an IQ, killing the GP here with this crazy green-white ramp deck.
Yeah.
And now you're here playing more Modern.
Yep, more Modern.
And you've got something different because for the past couple of months I've seen you basically just play ramp decks.
Yes, Our Promise has been a good friend of mine recently. But I think that the scape shift of Modern itself is shifting.
Mm-hmm.
So people are ready for scape shift. It's become kind of like the deck to beat recently. It's become very popular. People are kind of gearing towards it. So I've been, with the testing I've done with Scape Shift, I've been felt a little too hated out. I think Modern is very quick to react, and I think that they've done that to the Scape Shift deck just because of the popularity it's received. Yeah, so I'm ready to move on from that and try something very new and very exciting.
All right, well that is definitely what is happening here, and a few opens back, we had the emergence of the Hollow One Vengevine deck.
Yes. Yep.
The open that followed that, Todd Anderson brought a Death Shadow Hollow One deck to that tournament.
Right.
And since then, the deck has continued to evolve,
Yep.
and we've seen some rumblings on Magic Online of this hybrid Goryo's Vengeance Hollow One deck, and now you are playing a build of that deck.
Yes. Essentially, as you described, as soon as Hollow One was printed, people were very excited to break that wide open because free 4/4s, you can do some stuff with that. So. The shell that kind of came about was the shell that relied on the looting effects with Insolent Neonate, Faithless Looting, and Cathartic Reunion, and the free cycle effect of Street Wraith to be able to get Hollowed One into play for free. And that comboed perfectly with Vengevine. So that shell in and of itself had a lot of promise.
Right.
But something felt a little like it was missing something from that shell, I think. What the original deck was using was Temur Battle Rage and Become Immense to try to push it over the top.
Right, it was much more of an aggro deck alongside.
Right, it was like a zoo aggro deck. And then, and as you described, Todd Anderson kind of innovated a little bit and put Death Shadows in that shell, just because it's a 1-mana creature that you can use to trigger your Vengevines. But a deck list that I saw recently a while back was the same Death Shadow Vengevine shell, but it just kind of threw in Grizzlebrand's and Goryo's Vengeance, which was a little odd and took me a little while to realize what was actually going on. And I realized that if you look at the Grizzlebrand Goryo's Vengeance deck, if you look at the core of that deck, all it really needs to function is the discard package, which we've got in this deck already for the Hollowed Ones and Vengevines. Since we're already running the discard spells, like the looting spells, we can essentially fit that into our deck without any issues. We have everything that we need to make that functional.
Right. We see this convergence of 3 strategies that all have all the pieces they need.
Yeah. So the 3 essential strategies of this deck are the Hollowed One Vengevine deck or strategy that kind of synergizes with the cheap creatures of Gurmag Angler and Death Shadow. So there's some synergies between those 2 strategies. We've got just the basic play large creatures and Thoughtseize our opponent, and we've got the Grizzlebrand Goryo's Vengeance package. And it's a little counterintuitive, but it works because you run these looting spells, which lets you sculpt your hand into creating the strategy in the particular game of what's kind of coming together. So you have that filtering to, say you draw some Goryo's Vengeances, but you don't need them, you can just loot them away. If your plan revolves around just putting down big Death Shadows and Gurmag Anglers, right?
So how does this deck play out in practice? Are you preferable to one of these strategies, or is it always, adjusting to what your opponent's doing, or do you kind of have a idea of what you want to do in the dark?
A little bit of all 3, actually. When you look at your opening hand, you have an idea of what you were trying to do with that particular strategy. You always want to be doing the Goryo's Vengeance Grizzlebrand because that's kind of inherently the most powerful thing.
Sure.
And if you can get an early Grizzlebrand into play, say turn 2, you get your Grizzlebrand out, and then you draw 14 cards. Then you kind of get to do the rest of the strategy as the kind of the follow-up to that. One problem that Grizzlebrand decks have had in the past, especially when they play things like Emrakul, is that they do their big payoff, they Goryo's Vengeance out, a big payoff, they hit their opponent, and then they're kind of left with not doing much. But with this deck, what that allows us to do is we draw a bunch of cards, and then the biggest tech that I've actually found for this deck that people weren't running before that I threw in was Spirit Guides.
Sure.
The one problem with the Grizzlebrand package here was that when you draw a bunch of cards, when you've got all those cards in your hand, you couldn't really do anything. But the Simian Spirit Guide allows you to discard one to cast a Faithless Looting, cycle a Street Wraith, and discard your Vengevines from the 14 cards that you have in your hand. And then you can cast 2 free Hollowed Ones, and suddenly, on the turn that you're attacking with Grizzlebrand, you're also attacking with some Vengevines that are going to stick around, and you've got some Hollowed Ones in play. Yeah. So once you get to that point, you've essentially won the game because you've created this devastating board state and you've drawn a bunch of cards.
Not surprising to see Simian Spirit Guide come into a busted deck doing things that you probably shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely.
As its long history has indicated.
Yes. Yeah. Whenever you see Spirit Guide in a deck, it's pretty indicative of they're not doing fair things.
You're not trying hard enough in your broken strategy if you don't have Simian Spirit Guide in your deck.
Right. Right.
All right. So then the other side of the coin is you get to play this reactionary Death Shadow deck.
Yeah.
And that's also strong against people that are trying to disrupt what you're doing in the graveyard.
Right, yeah, Death Shadow is a combo piece with Vengevine to a certain extent, but it also is just an excellent backup plan. If your opponent is disrupting what you're doing, say they Thoughtseize away your Goryo's Vengeance, and they're playing some discard and trying to disrupt you that way, you just play a big creature, and then all of a sudden you're the one that's ahead on board. And typically the Thoughtseize decks that exist in Modern, the reason that is a powerful strategy is because you can disrupt your opponent and then be ahead on board and close the game out quickly before your opponent has time to draw into something that kills them. But in this strategy, there's just too many angles that you're taking where, so say they Thoughtseize you, they have to take your Goryo's Vengeance, and then you can just like play a Death Shadow. Now you're the one ahead on board and they have to have another answer or a bigger threat, just hard to do with the Death Shadow.
All right, so when you sat down, you said you were moving away from Scapeshift because the format was adapting to that.
Yes.
Now, the type of cards that hate Scapeshift are much different than the type of cards that kind of shut down the graveyard. Do you feel the format is shifting in a way that graveyard decks are open again? Because Dredge used to be the big thing before Shadow kind of took over.
Right, yeah. I do think to a certain extent that the graveyard hate is going away a little bit. It still exists because Death Shadow is still a popular deck and people are still going to be playing their Nihil Spellbombs for that. And so, but there's a significantly less amount of like true graveyard hate pieces like Rest in Peace and Grafdigger's Cage. Those are the cards that this deck really has a problem with. Because if you have a Spellbomb against me, I'm going to be able to rebuild from there. It's not like crippling. And I have the other plan of just like playing a big creature. Like the Rest in Pieces and the Grafdigger's Cages are actually problems because they're shutting down my entire Goryo's Vengeance package and all of my Vengevines.
Sure.
And I think that those are a little less prevalent.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move to the sideboard here. You have a bunch of powerful cards that are reactionary. Kind of looks like all sort of slides into the Grixis Death Shadow build.
It does feel a little bit like a Death Shadow sideboard.
Liliana's, Collective Brutalities, more Thoughtseizes, and Abrupt Decays is all of this interaction and kind of board control stuff.
Yeah. So the Lilianas were something that I threw into the sideboard because one of the strategies that I was having a lot of trouble with this deck was actually the control decks and some of the mid-rangey decks that had good ways of interacting with you, like Abzan was tough sometimes, and Death Shadow could occasionally just like Thoughtseize you, disrupt your plan, and then beat you down. So Liliana has actually been an insanely good card in those matchups where Liliana can actually just win on its own. If your opponent only has one threat down and you Liliana just deal with their threat, and we're post board, so they aren't really prepared for that happening, you can just really have the Liliana take over the game on its own.
Definitely.
And so we've got some Thoughtseizes. Those are just kind of an answer to the other combo decks that exist. You just want that sort of disruption. Same thing with Collective Brutalities. They're going to get Spurn, and they're just kind of like a generically good discard spell. Abrupt Decays are There are a few things that I had in mind when I decided to put Abrupt Decays in the deck. That was the Rest in Pieces and the Grafdigger's Cages that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
But also, one card that I've been struggling a lot against was Scavenging Ooze. Was one of the cards that they played it, and it disrupted my Vengevines and my Grizzlebrands and was just a big threat. So it was kind of difficult to deal with. So Abrupt Decays are just kind of like an answer to that. And they just benefit from being able to, kill whatever threat your opponent has post-board.
Then you have your suite of the typical modern hate cards that your deck can play.
Yes.
So you have your Spell Bombs, your Ancient Grudge, and a Pyroclasm.
Right.
Rounding out what the rest of the deck is doing.
Yeah. Spell Bombs are great, I think. It's the graveyard hate spell that any graveyard deck itself, I think, should run. The other option being Leyline of the Void, but I'm not really a fan of Leylines like that. And then, Ancient Grudge is just kind of like, good against artifacts. And Pyroclasm sweeps up a lot against other fast creature decks, like Affinity and Elves.
Elves is definitely picking up.
Yeah, Elves is, it was kind of like a nod to Elves, but a Pyroclasm to the board for sure.
Well, lastly, let's wrap this up with, you're someone who plays a lot of Modern, and as we started off talking how Modern has changed a bit, where do you see Modern at right now, and where is it going? You want to stay one step ahead in Modern. What do you see?
I think it's very important to have an edge in Modern. I think that the most successful Modern players are people who understand the format and are willing to adapt to that. I think that currently we were in a place where Eldrazi Tron was the best deck, and I think the reaction to that was Titan Shift. Titan Shift came in and kind of punished that a little bit. And now we're kind of in this format where, as a reaction to Titan Shift, the format's getting faster because you need to be able to kill Titan Shift before turn 4, mostly. So I think that a lot of people are playing some faster decks like Storm, things like that. I'm playing this deck because it's very fast, and I want to be able to get under Titan Shift. So I think that's where we're at right now. In the future, I could easily see some sort of mid-range deck like Abzan being where you want to be, because that deck is just very resilient, but is soft to the current Titan Shift builds. But if that ends up getting hated out, then the wheel rotates once again.
All
so,
right. Well, excellent insight here from you. We appreciate you coming in the sideboard for Collins. I'm Nick Miller. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Louisville.